Welcome, friends. I'm Lisa Levenger from Accelerated Literacy Learning. You may notice that today I will be reading by flashlight. About 3 minutes before we were scheduled to go live, we just lost power. So it'll be an exciting session for sure, one that we will all remember. I am thrilled to greet you with a hearty all for poetry and poetry for all as we navigate and learn together all about the power of poetry during April, National Poetry Month. Let's take a quick look at our poetry and review all the things we've learned together. We've learned that poets observe ordinary objects and make them extraordinary with their words. We've learned that poetry is a wonderful way to explore feelings, and indeed we've done that a few times. We've talked about how poems have rhythm and form, and we've talked about how poems paint pictures in our mind. We've also gone on to learn that poets use their 5 senses to enrich their poems. Poems can rhyme, they don't have to rhyme, but rhyming is a technique that's in your toolbox. We've learned that poems can sometimes look like a list. We've also learned that poems can take a form that we may or may not know about, which we learned a little bit about haiku last time. We also learned about list poems, and sometime this week Lorraine's going to teach us about shape poems. So poems always have rhythm. They don't always have to rhyme, but they always have rhythm. And poems can also have specific forms. Today we're going to explore how poets use specific techniques to strengthen their poems. And so we're going to explore metaphor today, and simile, and personification. So you can imagine my delight when I received a submission from a young lady named Claire. And Claire is a master at personification. I would love to read to you her wow line. It is unbelievable. She wrote about Easter eggs. She wrote this incredible poem. It starts off like this. One of a dozen, one by one, brothers, sisters, and our sons, taken out of the carton, we do not know who would be next. Claire, you are a master of personification, and you actually inspired this lesson for today, so thank you so much. Please, poets, continue to submit your poems to Susan at acceleratedliteracylearning.com. We are hosting our first annual poetry contest, and winners will receive some ALL swag, a poetic license to use, plus some poetry books to inspire your poems forevermore. All right, Claire and friends, we have revisited our poetry. We have set our intention for today to learn about metaphors and similes and personification. And what I love to do is to read a poem to you by Valerie Worth. It's a very short poem. I'm sure it might be a little difficult to see it, particularly with our lack of light today. But this poem is called Sun. And Valerie Worth just takes 4 simple lines of poetry, but within these 4 lines of poetry, she actually uses an example of metaphor, an example of simile, and an example of personification. So I'll read it to you. It starts off like this. The sun is a leaping fire, too hot to go near, but it will still lie down in warm yellow squares on the floor like a flat quilt where the cat can curl and purr. Wow. When poets use metaphors and similes, what they do is they take 2 things that are completely unrelated and they compare them to one another while linking them with something that they share in common. So if you were to study Valerie Worth's poem, it starts off with a metaphor. It starts right here. The sun is a leaping fire. Not only is the power not working, our marker's not working. That's okay. So when she says the sun is a leaping fire, she's comparing the sun to a fire. And she's linking it with the word is. And that's what distinguishes a metaphor from a simile. A metaphor links the 2 words with the word is. Let's continue. Too hot to go near, but it will still lie down in a warm yellow square. So the sun can't really lie down in a warm yellow square. Valerie Worth is taking the sun and she's giving it a quality of a person, laying down on a yellow warm square. So that's an example of personification. That's when a poet takes something that's not alive but gives it a human quality to strengthen their poem. Lastly, she says the floor like a flat quilt. She's comparing the sun to a flat quilt, and she's linking it with the word like. So when a poet uses comparison and links it with the word like, that's a simile. Okay, so Valerie Worth, in this simple 4-line poem to repeat, she uses a metaphor when she compares the sun to a fire. She personifies it. She uses personification when she talks about it laying on its yellow quilt, because we know that a sun really can't lay down on a yellow quilt. And finally, she compares the sun to a place where a cat can curl and purr. That's a simile. So you may notice that similes and metaphors are very similar in their linking of two things that are unrelated. And what distinguishes the two, just to repeat, is that similes use the word like or as. I think what I'll do today is I'll pull out two of my very favorite resources for writing poems, and that is my nature box as well as my feelings bowl. And I think what we'll do is use the nature bowl, the nature box, to inspire a poem for today. So just to remind you, a nature box are things I've collected that I have found outside, like this pine cone, and I also have a shell from the beach. And one of the things I have a lot in my nature box are rocks and gems. I've been collecting rocks and gems since I was a little girl. My sister Andy and I used to go right on our driveway, and we would find rocks that had something surprising inside of them. So sometimes rocks that look like this will have little red markings in them that look like little red crystals, and they're actually garnets. So we used to play a game to see who could collect the most garnets. So this is a very special rock to me because it looks like an ordinary rock on the outside, but then when you turn around you find it's actually full of crystals. So I think I'll use this to inspire a poem. And I'm going to try to embed some simile, metaphor, and personification. So of course I have my trusty poetry folder, which I hope that you're keeping, because by now you've written quite a few poems. And of course I will grab some poetry paper. Okay, so in our poetry paper, which remember is just line paper cut in half the long way, our poetry paper will get us to get right to work. So what I'm going to do is look at the rock just the way I would observe it. It's an ordinary object, but I'll make it extraordinary with my deep observation of what I see. And I'll also use words that are unusual to kind of tease out what makes this rock so special. So I think what I'm noticing is that it's very dark. And one of the things I like to do when I use simile is I like to use actually a Venn diagram like this, because I'm comparing two things. I'm going to compare the rock to a quality that I think is really interesting. So what I notice in this rock is that there's this very dark line. So in the middle here, I'll write the word dark. That's the quality I'm looking for. Okay, and I'll think of something else that I can compare the rock to that's also dark. So, well, today's kind of perfect for this, right? Rock dark like a thunderstorm. Okay, so I think my first line of poetry will actually be a simile. Rock, dark like a thunderstorm. I'm comparing the rock to the thunderstorm that we're experiencing right here, right now. Okay, so I'm going to continue. It's rough. It's got a very rough consistency here. So again, I'll use my Venn diagram. Instead of the word dark, I'm going to insert the word rough. And I'm going to compare it to something that's not always rough. I actually think I'm going to go with something a little bit more emotional. I'm going to go with rough like a long morning. kind of like today. Rough. Okay, so the next line will be rough, like a long morning. This rainy day where we lost power, we had unanticipated things happen this morning. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is grab something from my feelings bowl, because feelings are a really good way to link an object and make it into a metaphor. So let's see, I'm gonna go through here. Oh. Okay, so the word that came up was hope. Hopeful. So rock is hopeful. I love that. Is actually a metaphor. I'm comparing the rock to hope. Okay, so far I have two similes and a metaphor. I'm going to try to stick in some personification, just like Claire did in her poem. I'm noticing that if I put my finger into this hole of this crystal, it's actually holding onto it quite nicely, and it feels like a hug. Okay, so I'm going to add to it hugging. Rocks can't really hug, but I'm personifying it by doing something with a rock that a person can do. So hugging like dreams come true. My poem today isn't very long, but I did embed a simile, actually two similes, a metaphor, and some personification. So rock, dark like a thunderstorm. Rough like a long morning. Rock is hopeful. Hugging like dreams come true. Wow. So even a simple rock can inspire a poem that's very different. And if you challenge yourself to compare this rock to something you've never thought of before, that can really take your poetry to a whole new level. So today, I'm going to invite you to do a few different things. You can take something from your nature box. Again, it doesn't have to be a thing from nature. Some of the things in my nature box include a picture from a magazine, or also words of things that come in nature, like the word stream that my poet in residence wrote last week. These can inspire your poetry for today. Or what you can do is you can take a poem that you've already written and go back and add a metaphor or simile. So, I wrote a poem about being happy with you about a week and a half ago, and I think what I'm going to do is just insert a similar metaphor and some personification to make it even stronger. So the poem starts off like this: bubbles of joy, pink sparkles surround my heart. Birthday, wishes do come true. A surprise knock, and a June flower is popping out of my garden. I think what I'll do is I'll stick in a simile. Bubbles of joy, like sand at the beach. So I stuck in a simile. I'm beginning that revision process by going back to a poem I've already written and making it even better with a metaphor, a simile, or personification. And I think at this end, flowers popping out of my garden. I think I'm going back to that image of a hug. A hug for a new year to come. Okay? I've personified now. So, today you have a choice. You can either write an original poem, or you can go back to a poem and make it even better and stronger and more interesting by adding a metaphor, a simile, or personification. It's been an unusual morning with the lack of power, but it's still been a meaningful morning. So I want to thank you so much for spending time with me. Good luck as you personify and add metaphors and similes to poems, and I want to thank you so much. So be kind, be safe, be hopeful. Bye, everybody!